Croatia is a country that has everything. Well, almost everything. It's a small country located on the Mediterranean coast just across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. Croatia has tons of beaches all up and down the coast. It has beautifully preserved historic towns, idyllic islands, incredible sunsets, amazing seafood, a variety of archaeological sites, and so much more. The one thing it doesn't have, however, is any semblance of cycling infrastructure, so carving out the perfect path here took quite a bit more work than the carefree trails we experienced just over the border in Slovenia and further north in the Italian and Austrian Alps. Still, the extra effort was generously rewarded with fantastic weather and visits to some of the most beautiful places in all of Europe. In this video, I'll take you on a journey with Bobby and I across the Mediterranean to the shores of the Istrian Peninsula. We'll cycle around Istria and link up with Croatia's Dalmatian coast before island hopping our way down to Pag, an island with a unique geology unlike anywhere else on Earth. It wasn't always easy, but seeing these places by bike showed us a side of the country that most people don't ever get to see. Stay tuned and I'll show you some of the most famous destinations like Split and Rovinj, but also some much less photographed locations that make Croatia such an extraordinary place to travel. By the end of the video, I think you'll see what makes Croatia one of Europe's most remarkable destinations. This video, like my previous two, starts in Milan. It's not because it was the most convenient place to begin a trip to Croatia, but because it is where the last trip ended. I had already ridden the Italian and Austrian Alps and paid a short visit to Lake Como in my prior videos, but this time we were leaving the mountains behind to spend some time on the coast. I met up with my friend Bobby, who has done a bunch of trips with me in the past. We got our bikes ready and jumped on a train heading east. We got off in the town of Pescara. Still not Croatia, but stick with me, it's a bit of a process to get over there. Pescara is at the southern end of a large lake called Lake Garda, which, unlike the town of Pescara, has a nice peaceful bike lane along the shore. We spent part of the hazy afternoon riding the coast of the lake, and then some nice country roads lined with vineyards and pretty mountain views in the distance. We spent the night in Verona, which is a beautiful but very crowded city. The rain spoiled some of our sightseeing plans, but this was just a quick stop on our way to our actual destination anyway. The next day, we took the train again, and rode it to the end of the line this time to Venice. Venice is an incredible city with a fascinating history. I had seen it many years ago when I was traveling Europe for the first time as a student. It has apparently become one of the most over-touristed cities in the world, so we are not going to spend any significant time here. We were only here to link up with one more mode of transportation. Venice is built on a bunch of islands in a lagoon that doesn't allow anything with wheels inside the city. There are no cars, no motorcycles, and yes, no bikes. If you've ever been there, it'll be super obvious why. The tiny narrow streets are all linked together by over 400 bridges. We were only going a tiny distance along the perimeter of town, but we still had to carry our bikes over a dozen or so bridges. We realized much later that there was actually one road that was rideable, and we could have saved ourselves a bunch of hassle if we had known ahead of time. We arrived to the San Basilio ferry terminal and got on a long line to board. We had a bit of an adventure at boarding time because our last-minute reservations didn't make it onto the departure documents, and we had to run around getting those fixed before getting on. The boat departed Venice's harbor and headed across the Adriatic. We got a nice view of the iconic Piazza San Marco from the water. The weather was becoming quite strange, with half the sky looking bright and half of it turning gray and gloomy. The ride was about 4 hours long, and just about the last half hour we were hit by a huge storm. We spent the last bit of the ride rocking back and forth watching flashes of lightning out the windows. This marked a kind of continuation of mine and Bobby's previous European trip from last year. We traveled to Slovenia and ended the trip in Piran, which is just a few towns north of where we found ourselves today, in the Istrian town of Poreč. The Slovenia trip was marked by some nasty weather at the end, and as luck would have it, we were experiencing an absolute deluge of heavy rain the minute we got off the boat in Poreč. We ran to the nearest restaurant for a meal and to sort out some accommodations. We spent the next day in Poreč too, because there were some threats of storm the day after we arrived as well, and we didn't want to run into any issues right from the beginning. The storm wasn't quite as bad as we expected, and we probably could have ridden, but at least we did get some exploring in. There is a basilica from the 6th century in Poreč, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has this austere white bell tower overlooking the city. Poreč was a quaint, resorty seaside town and a nice introduction to Croatia, but we didn't come here to relax. We packed up our bikes and headed out riding south along the Istrian coast. The ride out of Poreč took us through a nice little park at the end of town that was dotted with beaches. Plenty of vacationers were out enjoying the warm weather. A short distance further along the coast, we stopped in a picturesque little town with a tall Venetian-era tower. It had a panoramic view of the coastline, and I could even make out the bell tower of Rovinj in the distance. Eventually, we hit a dirt road with only forest on either side. It was a bit muddy and not the most beautiful stretch of road, but there was plenty of shade and we had the road entirely to ourselves. We rode a little out of the way and up a small hill to visit the ruins of an abandoned medieval town. It was called Dvigrad, and despite being occupied for over a millennium, it was abandoned several hundred years ago. There was only a tiny restaurant next to the stone remains of the town's defensive walls. We took a stroll through some of the remaining arches and pathways before continuing down towards the sea.
Definitely some rails.
We connected briefly with an unpaved rail trail that followed an old train line and made for some very pleasant riding in the late day sun. The trail dropped us off just on the outskirts of Rovinj at sunset. Rovinj was a perfectly preserved ancient city whose history stretches back to antiquity. Many empires and kingdoms left their mark here over the centuries, especially the Venetians, for whom Rovinj was an important stronghold for over 500 years. The town is lined with narrow cobblestone alleys leading up to a tall bell tower at the apex of the hill on which it is built. There are restaurants and bars aplenty serving all sorts of regional specialties, and we ate really well here. I couldn't resist climbing the tower here as well for some more sea views. The following morning, we rode past a long marina to a coastal park similar to the one we saw in Poreč. It was early fall, but the weather was still beautiful and probably a bit hotter than we expected. The water was crystal clear with amazing views, so we took the opportunity to cool off a little bit and hang out with the jellyfish. Very few beaches in the world come with these kinds of incredible views. Eventually, we got back in the saddle and rode a few hours on a mix of paved and pretty rough roads down towards southern tip of Istria and into the largest city on the peninsula. Pula was a prominent city to ancient Rome and has one of the best preserved Roman amphitheaters in the world. We explored the theater and the handful of other Roman-era buildings still standing in the city's downtown. Before departing, I had the pleasure of fixing the trip's first flat caused by a super sharp thorn. Having gotten all the way to the south of the peninsula, our route was to take us north from here following Istria's eastern coast. The day took us through some empty roads in a quieter part of the country. All the nights so far were spent in busy touristy towns, but we were finally going to stay in a tiny village away from any crowds. We stayed in a nice rental home with a beautiful garden and enjoyed the welcoming small-town hospitality. Our original route was going to take us on a paved road with a big climb around the town of Barban, but we decided to scout out a different approach. We enjoyed some coffee and some walnuts in a town at the end of the road called Racal, then took a deserted, barely rideable trail down to a tiny cove with an abandoned mill. This route connected us to a small park with some paths that lead past an area of marshland and into a marina in the village of Target. After some rough Type 2 miles, it was nice to get back to civilization and enjoy a nice meal of local seafood and observe the local fauna. From Target, it was a relatively short ride, with an inevitable climb at the end, to the next sizable town, which was called Labin. I had never heard of Labin before showing up there at golden hour, and it instantly became one of the highlights of the whole trip. It was situated on a tiny hill with dramatic drops on all sides. The town was composed entirely of colorful old buildings with iconic orangey-red terracotta roofs. There are spectacular views of the sea from various vantage points, especially the top of yet another bell tower. A walk through Labin's 16th century city gate was like walking into an open-air museum. There weren't many visitors, and there was a quiet calm in the narrow little alleyways. Labin looked completely preserved from hundreds of years ago, except the Venetian lion that is supposed to be in the space above the church entrance seems to have gone missing. The interior of the town was tiny, and it only took a few minutes for us to walk around the whole thing, but I easily could have spent the whole day here. I couldn't help but linger for a few extra photos before hitting the road again. Riding out of Labin, we checked out a rather neat outdoor sculpture garden. The road north featured a descent followed by an ascent to the small town of Plomin, yet another medieval town with an impressive set of ruins. The town, like many in this region, changed hands a few times over the years and was actually abandoned for some time after World War II. Luckily, its population rebounded and numbers around 130 people today. Just beyond Plomin, the road comes to a sharp point where a small bay ends. It is marked by an abandoned hotel with some absolutely stunning views of the Mediterranean, along with the island of Kres and the city of Rijeka in the distance. The location is so spectacular, I'd be shocked if someone didn't buy and restore this place sometime soon. From the elevated vantage point, we spotted the first of Croatia's island ferries, which connects Istria with the northern portion of Kres. This is a popular route for cyclists to take, and we considered it, but decided to stick to the mainland for the time being.
You filming me, I'm filming you.
We retreated to a splendid long descent back to sea level, past rows of cypresses and wonderful views of the Dalmatian coast just across the water. There was thyme and rosemary growing wild on the side of the road. Eventually clouds started moving in, and traffic was picking up, because we were nearing one of the popular resort spots at the northeastern corner of the Istrian coast. The next morning, we explored Opatia while trying to dodge the rain. Opatia and the surrounding villages were reminiscent of Lake Como, with opulent villas built for the leisure class during the Austro-Hungarian Empire's rule over these areas in the 19th century. Also, just like my experience at Lake Como, there was a ton of non-stop traffic and little space for cycling. It made enjoying the sights a bit difficult, and we didn't linger long on this stretch. We quickly left the Istrian Peninsula behind on our way to the city of Rijeka. Rijeka is Croatia's third largest city, and noticeably more built up than any of the places we visited so far. Our route took us past some factories and train tracks. It had a kind of dystopian feel, which I guess is pretty common in the liminal spaces of bigger cities. Once inside the city center, Rijeka was quite charming. This wasn't our destination for the night, but we did make time for a meal. We saw lots of truffle-oriented commerce in Istria, and finally ordered a truffle pasta along with this meaty pizza. We rode out of Rijeka up some hills with views of the port and some industrial areas. There were some pretty ominous-looking clouds forming overhead. We didn't have a destination set in stone for this evening, but needed to figure out a plan in case the weather made riding completely miserable. The wind picked up rather heavily, and we decided to wait out whatever was coming in a small hilltop restaurant. We watched the rain come down just across a tiny bay, but it never made it to our side. It was getting late, so we decided to book a place to stay in the nearest town, which was called Bakar. We descended down an incredibly steep road, past a 16th century castle, into Bakar, which had a really sleepy small town feel to it. There weren't a lot of places open, and from the looks of it, no other tourists. I think if this town was located in many other countries, it would have been a decent tourist draw, but Croatia has dozens of attractive historic towns just like Bakar, so many of them fly way below the radar. After a lap around town in much better weather the following morning, we rode out of Bakar, but not before filming some machines transferring coal. Coal processing is an important part of Bakar's economy, and there's a huge disused tunnel that previously transported coal between the two shores of the bay that rumor has it is going to become a museum soon. So far on the trip, we roughly followed Eurovelo 8 with a few tweaks and adjustments. There weren't too many route options for us to decide between, but there was a major decision to make now. There are two main choices for heading south through Croatia. One route rides through the hills along the coast, which the Eurovelo follows, and another route island hops along the Adriatic. Most people have heard of Greece's famous islands, but many people don't know about the 1,200 islands that dot Croatia's coast. Here's a little fun fact. Croatia ranks number 22 in the world by length of coastline, which puts them just behind Chile and ahead of countries like Argentina, France, and Spain. Much of this is because of Croatia's numerous islands. Between the two route options, we chose the island one for a few different reasons. It seemed there was a busy road section on the mainland, followed by a long stretch through tiny towns with little if any food and accommodation options. Taking a few ferries and riding a bunch of islands also seemed like a nice way to speed up our trip heading south. After Bakar, we rode the coast for a little while until we came across a small bridge linking the Croatian mainland with the island of Krk. Krk is one of the larger islands and also hosts Rijeka's airport. Traffic was super heavy on the bridge and the one main road on the island. At times we were able to connect to a beat-up dirt track, which slowed us down a little bit but was much nicer of a ride. Our time was somewhat limited by the ferry schedule, so we didn't stop for a proper meal. Instead, we improvised with some local supermarket produce and made salami and chip sandwiches. About halfway down Krk, the island that couldn't afford to buy a vowel, we were able to get off the busy main road and take a mix of trails and quiet roads. It was a considerably better ride, with nice views of the coast. We hurried down to the tiny port of Valbiska just in the nick of time to catch our boat. We loaded our bikes on and off we went to the island of Rab. The boat dropped us off in a tiny port on the northern side of Rab called Lopar. Compared to the bumper-to-bumper traffic of Krk, Rab was the complete opposite. We rode mostly empty roads past farms and quiet village life. The views of the sea were incredible. The island was fairly small, but riding was terrific with many of these tiny narrow alleys. We rode across the island fairly quickly to get to the main town, also called Rab. We were hoping to catch one more ferry before the day was done. When we arrived in Rab town, we went straight to the dock and were told yes, there are plenty of ferries, but none of them will take bikes. We tried reasoning with one of the boat operators, were met with a very stern nein. I actually hadn't considered this specific possibility, but it was not going to be a dead end. There was always a plan B. There was another ferry option to the mainland further south, but there was one more option, and that one was even more appealing. None of the boats to Novalja carry bikes, but there is a once-a-day ferry to the same island that does. It was a fine option, and we booked ourselves a place to stay in Rab. The town was quite busy with a ton of eating and drinking establishments, serving a large population of tourists from all around. We had some time to explore Rab in the morning, and it was easy to see why it was so popular. It was a prominent settlement for centuries and is full of historic monuments. There are not one, not two, but 4 different bell towers forming the skyline. After a bit of exploring, we set about figuring out the situation with the boat. The normally scheduled boat was actually full, so a small water taxi picked up the overflow of passengers along with our bikes, and we sailed a short distance to the northernmost point of Croatia's longest island. We were dropped off at the port of Loon on the island of Pog. That's a lot of three-letter places. If you're following along, it was Kirk to Rob to Loon on Pog. We cycled along the only road on a long, narrow stretch of the island lined with farms and ancient olive trees.
Is this the Olive Garden?
We rode straight past Navalia, the town we couldn't get a boat to, which seemed like a bit of a dump anyway. I swear I'm not bitter at all. Even though it was already September, the weather seemed to be getting warmer with every day, so we made time to relax at a beach in the afternoon. Our route took us off the main road onto a gravel path past a goat farm before crossing the road and descending towards a small inner bay on the island. The landscape of this portion of the island was completely otherworldly. We were surrounded by all sorts of barren hills of all different colors. Many people say visiting Pog is like taking a trip to the moon. The road we were on was completely deserted. The surface was kind of rough with lots of sandy areas that stalled our progress and required a bit of walking. That said, I absolutely loved this stretch. It was such a unique place to get to ride a bike, unlike anywhere I've ever been, and the golden hour sunlight made all the strange rocky hills absolutely radiant. Sadly, all good things come to an end, and we rolled into the town of Pog right around last light. Pog, the town, despite its modest size, is absolutely worth a visit. It was not busy at all when we were there, making it a great place to relax and enjoy the little alleys, as well as the large beach right next to the bridge in the middle of the city. The beach is at the end of a small bay, and had crystal clear shallow water surrounded by the distinctive hills we rode past the day before. Immediately outside the city of Pog is an archaeological site of Pog's old town. There was a disused bell tower attached to some abandoned city walls and a church which had been carefully restored. We took a quick stroll through the site before riding on south along the island. The road we were on looked like it was going through a desert with not a single tree in sight. There was a scenic small bridge crossing with nice views of the sea, and we were officially back on the mainland. Our path took us towards the water and followed a double track through a farm field. It was such a wonderful stretch I had to stop and take it in for a moment. We were away from the busy road, surrounded only by sounds of the wind and the sea, in perfect weather, and with lovely views of the Dinaric Alps on the horizon. There is something really special about moments like this on a bike tour, when you feel a sense of inner peace and at one with the landscape. There was a short but grueling climb on a rocky trail that connected us to the pavement again. We took the road southwest towards Zadar, and in a few short minutes my beautiful meditative state was replaced with frustration. The road we took was a narrow two-lane full of traffic zipping by and absolutely no shoulder. We actually crossed Eurovelo 8, but their route took different roads through the town of Nîmes closer to the shore. Pretty much any route would have been better than the one we took, so we pounded out the last few miles and arrived to a nice sunset on the bridge at the entrance to Zadar. This sunset view was pretty much the only nice experience we had on our visit to Zadar. As soon as we entered the historic city center, it felt like walking into a crowded mall. There were thousands of people absolutely everywhere. Zadar felt like a Croatia-themed amusement park, and we found it totally impossible to enjoy it. Half the restaurants in town had a long line out front and at least a half an hour wait. We did the best we could and turned in for the night. In the morning, we found the clue as to why it might have been so overrun with tourists. We took a lightning-fast dash through the Roman Forum and the Sea Organ before getting back on our bikes to leave this place and never come back. We battled traffic for about a mile to get to a specific port and catch another ferry. A visit to a couple of islands off Zadar is part of the official Eurovelo 8 route, and we decided to rejoin it. The ferry ride was super quick, and we disembarked at the port of Preko on the island of Ugljan. We were finally back to peaceful riding again as the road curved around some small, quiet beach towns. The main road wasn't especially crowded either, and featured a small bridge connecting Ugljan to the island of Pasman. We had a quick snack and made quick work of the rest of the island to catch a ferry back to the mainland. A scenic path on a narrow strip of land between the sea and a large lake was how we ended our day, before booking a last-minute apartment in a small village called Drage as the light began to fade. I was livid when I retrieved my bike in the morning to find this sight: a flat tire and a dozen goat head thorns sticking out all over my wheel. I feared that we were well into goat head country like we were in Greece, and that flats would be a daily occurrence. We had no choice but to carry on, though, and we reconnected with the lovely path from the day before along Vransko Lake. This part of Croatia is full of beautiful, unassuming towns like this one called Pirovac. It was full of tiny alleys and attractive red-roof buildings with a tall church bell tower in the middle. There were plenty of beaches and very few tourists to compete with for space, so we took some time to enjoy the water again. I find myself enjoying small towns like these even more than more famous ones because they have more of a local feel to them and give a better sense of what the country I'm visiting is really like. After an extended break in Pirovac, we rode past a few more coastal towns before turning slightly inland. There was a great little gravel section through some farm country with rock pile fences. It turned very rough for a tiny stretch before we hit a bridge just outside the city of Šibenik. We rode into town and watched the late-day sun reflect off some of the enormous forts overlooking the top of the city. Šibenik was a great place to explore. There is a busy marina lined with bars and restaurants. The interior of the city is full of narrow, ancient walkways and tiny staircases. Hauling the bike up and down all the steps was not always fun, though. The ride out of Šibenik took us up into the hills. So far on the trip, we were mostly following the coast and didn't have to do much climbing, but there was a fairly long pass to get over on this particular day. The views kept getting better and better as we rode past some burnt trees from recent fires. The hills on this side of the bay were completely different color from the ones we just passed. This was the incredible view from the top before we turned away from the water. The riding at the top of the hill was quiet, with almost no traffic as we passed mostly empty villages. Eventually, we started descending back down towards the sea. The trail was initially a tiny, narrow paved path, which quickly became a rough, unpaved path past a small farm. It was a very enjoyable stretch with light traffic and widely varying landscapes. We didn't reach our destination before sunset, but luckily the last few miles were spent on a quiet coastal path leading to the town of Trogir. Trogir looked a lot like Šibenik, but without the stairs. It was a short distance away from the Split airport, and planes constantly passed rather loudly overhead. The medieval historic center of Trogir is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and well worth exploring. This was the end of the road for Bobby, who needed to get back home a few days before I did. He had to do a little negotiating to get his bike on a bus and took it to Rijeka to then make a dash across the top of Istria and catch a train to Milan from Trieste. I, meanwhile, continued meandering down the coast in the direction of Split. The bike route literally circled the airport's perimeter fence, and I watched a few planes take off and land right next to me. The rest of the ride along the coast was really pleasant, with lots of attractive small towns and a few historic monuments, including this incredible 16th century fortress, which is only connected to the mainland by this narrow stone bridge. Just before my ride concluded in the busy streets of Croatia's second largest city, the route had one more surprise for me. It took me right through the center of an archaeological site dating back to the 3rd century BC. It's called Salona and features the remains of an amphitheater, public baths, and a variety of other structures, mainly from the Roman period. This modest site was the capital of Roman's province of Dalmatia, and once one of the largest cities in the area. When I cycled through it, the site was open to the public, and the only other people I saw were a few locals walking their dogs. A few busy roads, and the occasional bike lane later, I arrived in Split. The city of Split was quite busy and bustling, even in somewhat gloomy weather. It features the remains of Roman ruler Diocletian's palace built in the 3rd century AD and is listed as one of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. Its construction laid the groundwork for the building of Split, and many buildings are integrated into its walls. The palace and other sites near Split were featured in the show Game of Thrones, and the city has been growing in popularity amongst tourists from all over. Some of the other popular sites in town are the main boardwalk in town called the Riva, and the large park on a hill overlooking the city called Marjan. I spent an extra day in Split to wait out some questionable weather and to take a few extra photos. I was approaching the southern end of the country, but I had a long way to get back, so I decided to save the remaining destinations, including the walled city of Dubrovnik, for another visit. There isn't a very robust rail network in Croatia to quickly get back to Italy, so I decided to return by boat. This left me with a few days to slowly make my way back to a ferry terminal in Zadar. I decided to speed the process up a little bit and also include one of the sites I had missed by taking a bus to the small town of Skradin. I saw the famous Klis fortress outside Split from the window and arrived at the entrance to one of Croatia's famous national parks called Krka. I rode the short path to one of the park's main attractions, which was a large waterfall. Most visitors take a boat there, but the bike ride on this quiet road was a really nice alternative. Once inside, I walked the paths along the waterfall and stopped for a few photos. It was certainly beautiful, but I would hesitate to say the waterfall itself was worth the trip. Ideally, I would spend more time seeing the rest of the park, but I had places to get to, so I had to carry on. Incidentally, if you're into waterfalls, I definitely recommend checking out Slovenia, where the waterfalls literally come to you, especially after a little rain. I watched this absolutely gorgeous sunset from the road on the way to Šibenik for a second visit, where I carried my bike up a million stairs to stay in the same tiny but clean and affordable hotel room I booked last time. One of the great things about retracing one's steps is the ability to repeat particularly nice areas while skipping bad ones and also making time for some sites that were missed. I did not need a second invitation to ride these incredible farm roads again with their little rock walls. The first time here, I sped right past this ruin of some old churches, but I spared a few minutes for them this time. Apparently, little is known about this tiny site, but many historians believe it to be from the 6th century AD. Just before revisiting Pirovac for a second time, I found another small archaeological site, this time dating back to the 1st century AD. This one is in a small town called Evin, and just like the ruins in the old town of Pag, it featured one small church that was fully rebuilt and back in use today. I was the sole visitor to the site when I was there. It sat next to some farmland in a beautiful location not far from the road I was riding, and well worth the visit. Here's some more info on the site from the plaque out front. I spent 2 more nights on the road in small villages including Sukoshan, where I tried to photograph this cool sunken villa, except someone parked their ugly party boat right behind it. I did get a few shots I was happy with, and I even used the boat's light in this one. I passed a few more tiny seaside villages and a small industrial park before riding back into Zadar. I only had an hour to spare and didn't intend to go inside the city, so I grabbed lunch just outside. I checked my email and was super annoyed to find that my boat was canceled due to weather and rescheduled for the following day. Zadar was pretty much the last place I wanted to revisit, but I was now stuck here. The energy in town the second time around was entirely different though, perhaps in part due to the absence of a certain floating city on the main dock. It was still busy, but nothing like what I had seen just a few days prior. I spent a little more time at the sea organ this time, which is a really interesting piece of public art. A number of pipes hidden below the pier play music as waves push air through them, creating a sort of eerie but beautiful sound composed by nature itself. There was a photo exhibit set up on the town's elevated wall, and I made time to visit the top of the tower to take in the sweeping views of the harbor. I must admit, I did find myself enjoying Zadar the second time around, though I would not recommend visiting here anywhere near high season. My return strategy consisted of taking 2 4-hour boats across the sea instead of what would be over 20 hours of buses going in a circle on land. The cancellation of the first one required a little negotiating with the second one, but luckily there was one available for the next day as well. Much of the coastal economy is seasonal, and schedules change dramatically month by month. One of the boats I was about to take was going to be the last one of the year. Accommodation prices also fall considerably later in the season, and we were paying quite a bit less as we got closer to October. We did not camp on this trip, but did pass many campsites, especially in Istria. Many of them were like a tiny city with all kinds of amenities, so it wouldn't be very rustic, though I'm sure wild camping is possible in many areas as well. We found hotels much fewer in Croatia than private apartments, which were available almost everywhere around the country, usually with these sorts of signs out front. The rescheduled boat ran between Zadar and Pula, including stops on a bunch of smaller islands along the way. I was initially the only bike on the boat, but then 2 German cyclists boarded, and taking one look at their bike, I knew we would be friends. They were both riding classic, rebuilt, old-school 26ers with some sweet custom bike packing builds. My trip was ending, but theirs was just beginning, and they disembarked on one of the islands just before Istria. I got off in Pula well after sunset, and had to wake up super early for the boat back to Venice. I used the same travel company that we started our trip on when we took the boat to Porridge. Turns out the company runs one-day tours of Venice that arrive in the morning and depart back to Istrian ports in the afternoon. I enjoyed their history lesson on Venice even though I was only going to be there for a few minutes. I cycled on the correct road this time and didn't need to carry the bike over too many stairs. Finally, I got back on the train and headed to Verona, where my ample experience helped me run up and down a bunch of stairs to catch a connection for Milan leaving in less than 5 minutes. All in all, Croatia was an incredible trip. There was a mix of nice towns, natural beauty, and history was almost everywhere. We could have spent twice as much time sightseeing and still missed a trip's worth of highlights. The riding was a mixed bag though. There were times when the ride quality was a solid 10 out of 10, but there were almost always significant sections that were like a 2 out of 10 with busy traffic just before and after. I'll give the cycling quality specifically an overall score of 7 out of 10 for the trip. Drivers were usually respectful, but once in a while they would pass each other in our lane, going uncomfortably fast. Riding many of the mildly busy roads also meant inhaling a lot of exhaust, which seemed little, if at all, filtered coming out of half the cars, which is quite rare where I'm from. Except for parts of Istria, bike paths were largely non-existent, or some tiny sad lane that ran for half a mile before disappearing abruptly. We followed Eurovelo 8 for more than half of the way, but by their own admission, the route is not entirely developed and involves a lot of dicey sections in traffic. That said, I would not hesitate to recommend Croatia for a bike trip because the amazing sections far outweigh the bad ones, and the cultural sites and other attractions were absolutely worth a bit of occasional struggle. Because we followed the coastal route with some islands thrown in, we didn't really spend time in the mountains further inland or visit the capital. Let me know in the comments if you've ridden in that region and if the ride quality was any better. We found the Croatians that we met kind and super helpful. We came back with lots of recommendations we unfortunately didn't have time to see. A waiter at a touristy restaurant in Porridge gifted us one of those tiny bags full of lavender, which I kept, and it was very nice to open the bag with my dirty clothes to find it smelling like a fresh field of flowers. Pretty much the biggest animal we ran into on the trip was a kitten, and luckily no aggressive dogs. We didn't see any kind of potentially dangerous animals, but we did eat a few. Sorry, vegetarians. In general, our diet consisted of a ton of delicious seafood, which was available pretty much everywhere. Food was more affordable than some parts of the world, but by no means cheap. The best deals, though, were at the bakeries, which had amazing croissants and all sorts of delicious goodies for only a few euros. To fully enjoy myself, I had to quickly identify the best lager in the country, and this Golden Bear was my hands-down favorite. This is the last of 3 videos that start and end in Milan. I spent one last night there before returning home. By the last visit, I came to really like spending time there. The city was attractive and had a busy, fast-paced energy not unlike New York. I hope to find the time to come back and spend more time here. I hope to see more of Croatia sometime soon as well. I've been extremely fascinated with the Balkans and have done a number of trips to this region over the years. I still have a few more countries to visit before I collect them all, so a few Croatian highlights like Dubrovnik and Zagreb are likely to be checked off one day in the future. Leave a comment if you cycled Croatia and what your experiences were like. Also, if you made it this far, check out my other videos of rides through the Alps, Lake Como, and Slovenia. I'll leave links in the description, along with a link to the video where I'm building the bike I was riding. Thank you for watching.